Thank you all for coming. It's so great to see everyone here. I mean, it's a full house, and I heard that all the previous events were also full. That's great to hear. I think there is a lot of thirst in Berlin for these kinds of discussions. And yeah, before we begin, I will only be introducing our speakers today. But before that, we will hear a little word from Sarah from Pluto Press.
Hi everyone, welcome. It's quite overwhelming. I normally do not speak in front of public, so be gracious and forgiving. What I wanted to say is I wanted to give us a reminder of why we are here. We started all this because of our friends in Gaza, Ibrahim and Bezan, to fundraise. And it started with a little drawing and some more drawings we sold and buttons like I condemn Germany or Free Neukölln from Germany, and continued with these publications and the funding of Pluto Press. And now we're here, and Mohamed came to talk to you all, but we don't want to forget why we are initially coming here. And I want to ask you all, please, if you find 5 or even 10 euros in your pockets, you will find our friend Katja at the end of this event next to the door with a little box, and we will send it oh, there it is. Yes, that's what the box looks like. And everything you can give will directly go tomorrow to them. I can tell you that what we got on Saturday is already turned into winter jackets, and these people need to survive.
So I will read the bios of our two speakers. Dr. Anna Younes is joining us via Zoom. Anna Younes is a German Palestinian scholar. Her focus rests on what she has coined, a term she has coined, the war on anti-Semitism, in her 2015 PhD dissertation, which is, in her framing, a counterinsurgency war following in the footsteps of a post-World War II New World Order, framed by tactics used in the war on drugs and most prominently the war on terror. Younes thinks transnationally and transhistorically and has publications in English, French, German, Italian, and Spanish. Her work zooms in on settler colonial theories, psychoanalysis, and race-critical theories, and can be found on academia.edu or her personalized website, annaesteryounes.net. And our esteemed speaker, Mohamed Abdou, is an interdisciplinary scholar of Indigenous, Black, critical race and Islamic studies, as well as anti-racist, feminist, gender, sexuality, women, decolonial, and post-colonial studies, with extensive fieldwork experience in the Middle East, North Africa, and Turtle Island. He is a self-identifying Muslim anarchist and diasporic settler of color based in Toronto, which is so-called Canada. And back to Pluto Press. These events are hosted by Pluto Press, a collective of friends who are interested in building decolonial cross-movement solidarities. There is a limited number of 2 of Muhammad's shorter articles now published by Pluto Press in English and Arabic at the book table in the back. You can also see our friends at Collective Bibliothèque and Plakat Archive table, and you can sign up for a library card and get more info about the Anarchist Library. Yeah, and Sarah has already delivered her note. So please, maybe a round of applause for the speakers. And
yeah, first of all, thank you for coming to the audience that I unfortunately am not able to see, for organizing these three wonderful events, of which I could only participate in one this time. So Pass on Press, thank you so much. Also for the wonderful introduction. Obviously, it's such an honor, Mohammed, to be able to ask you a couple of questions today. But I think when we discussed this event already earlier, I think you wanted to give a short introduction yourself. So I'm just going to leave the stage for you, and then I'm going to jump into a few questions.
Assalamu alaikum. And shalom alachaim to our anti-Zionist Jewish siblings. I'm deeply touched, to say the least. I really am. So forgive me for having my moment, especially this being the last event. Immense gratitude, first and foremost, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to Creator. But also to Pass on Press, Amanda, Sarah, Hakeem, Katya, I'm Katya. We have two Katyas in Pass on Press. To Anna, it's an incredible honor. To all of you, you're what makes this possible. There is no point in me being here, besides obviously community, if you are all not here. I usually start anything that, before passing it back to Anna, and I really enjoy, obviously, being in conversation with her, let alone with all of you. I usually start anything that I say or do, but particularly that which is public, by a prayer. It's a prayer from the Quran. Some of you that may have attended the first event in Casino, that was really, again, very heartwarming and welcoming, let alone the event yesterday at Khan al-Janub. Probably know this already, but it's very necessary for me to say it. I'll start first with Arabic. It's a verse from the Quran, and it is the dua, or the prayer, that Moses said before Pharaoh. Allahumma shrah li sadri ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم اشرح لي صدري, O Creator, open thy breast. ويسر لي أمري, and make my affairs easy. This isn't easy, not at least for me. Make my affairs easy. واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي, and undo the knot in my tongue, such that what it is that I have to share with all of you, reaches your hearts, your minds, is accessible, and that we learn from one another. I don't believe really in nouns. Nouns is teaching. I'm here to learn from all of you as much as, hopefully extensively, we're all here to learn from one another. And learning is a verb. Teaching means that you're all submitting yourselves to me teaching you all. It's a very hierarchical, authoritarian way of thinking about the world. Learning, as the Zapatistas say, is something altogether different. It's a verb. And the Zapatistas have a beautiful saying, and I had the honor of living with them on 2 different occasions. Holding each other's hands, we ask one another what each of us knows. And together we discover the revolutionary horizon together, without leaving anybody behind. Which amongst us have not internalized misconceptions, stereotypes, fascisms? Fascism is a mass psychology. The process of getting to know is one that involves deep responsibility, deep commitment, profound revolutionary love. In this state of war, that we are all implicated within, and this war far antecedes and precedes us. and we need to live up to our ancestors. But again, I'm interested in a conversation, and there's much to say, so I'll hand the mic back to Anna. And again, I'm incredibly, incredibly thankful for your collective presence, and I only wish just that Anna could be with us today. But she is with us in heart and spirit and presence. Thank you.
Yeah, I think events like that actually might get me back to Germany, but I'm also somehow happy not being there. So, but yeah. So actually, I had prepared 6 to 7 questions, but now that we've all heard the news, I suppose, or many of us by now. So a ceasefire is in the making or potentially on the horizon. And I would like to address this briefly before I jump into this wonderful context of Germany and the work that you've been doing, Mohamed, in your writings. So my first question to you is actually, is there anything that you would like to say now after 15 months of genocide and also global international mobilizing? What are you making of this moment right now? Is there anything that you would like to say in particular? And that is what I was thinking about, in fact, when I listened to the news right now. In this long durée of settler colonial conquest, ceasefires, and appeasement politics, what are we to make of this deal that already seems to be quite, well, unbalanced might be not even the right term for this, but yeah, I'm just wondering if you have anything to say about that.
Thank you, Anna. I think there's a lot to say, but I'll try and be brief because, like I said, I want us to get through your wonderful questions, which I think are very vital, and hopefully those will loosen up a lot of threads. Ceasefire or not, we are at war. And the nature of this war is racial and religious. And we can sit down and talk about why that is the case. I hope that our people in Gaza get some respite, given they are the ones that are undergoing the Shoah, the Holocaust, the apocalypse, alongside with the Congo, Sudan. There are many genocides simultaneously going on, and of course the irony is the fact that we've been doom scrolling a genocide live streamed on phones made of copper and cobalt in the Congo from another genocide. Somehow we're supposed to defeat capitalism, but again, these are all kinds of conversations that we can untangle. And there's much to say, again, specifically about the ceasefire. I can say that I'm glad, but I'm also not. I'm also not, because October 7th was about eliminating the possibility and the potential for mediocrity. Palestine is worthy more, or something more than mediocrity. To me, again, this is a war that is about all or nothing. And I'd like to think, again, beyond the realm of survival, beyond the realm of anti-colonialism, and to think about, I'm really tired of survival. I want our people to thrive. One is reactionary, the one is active. Anti-colonialism is not the same as decolonization. And I think it's high time that we contend with that. Otherwise, what was this suffering of our people in Gaza, in a Daffa, that are being murdered by traitors? Mahmoud Abbas and the PA. What is it all for? I really fear that people, and again, rightfully so, want the genocide to end. Okay? But it seems that people more are concerned with the genocide ending than they are with the question of liberation. Liberation is something altogether different. And our people have done valiantly, courageously, everything. Everything. They put everything on the line. Unfortunately, the rest of the world, us, me included, haven't. And then that takes me to the second part of Anna's gracious question, very important question. Mobilization. Kwame Ture said that there's a difference between mobilization and organization. Mobilization is around issues. MLK was a great mobilizer. Malcolm X, our shining black prince, was a great organizer. Organizing is about structures. Structures. Is the ceasefire going to eliminate Zionist settler colonialism? Is it going to eliminate crusading settler colonialism in the context of the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, a genocide that has been going on there with regard to indigenous people for 533 years? There's an ongoing genocide there of indigenous people, of black people. What, there are no Trayvon Martins, Michael Browns, George Floyds, Breonna Taylors. What happened to Black Lives Matter? This is the problem. We move from one struggle to the next, to the next, to the next. Competition, Olympics of oppression. Why? Because most of the time we're hearkening for the world of the above, the nation state, as if it's a neutral entity, as opposed to learning how to redream dangerously. If colonialism and imperialism stole anything from people of color, and I don't like that acronym, let alone BIPOC, let alone LGBTIQ, these compartmentalized identities, it is our ability to dream a different world. As the Zapatistas say, a world where all worlds belong. A world where all worlds belong. But that requires a lot of different things that maybe we'll talk about. And what I see then with respect to mobilization for 16 months, and I said this in Tahrir, I've been saying it for the past 16 months, I wrote an article in Al Jazeera about it, and so on and so forth. What I see right now, and again, this is not to diss direct action or protest politics or BDS or the blocking of ports. All these are tactics. Tactics, that isn't a strategy. What is the strategy for liberation? This becomes a question, because what I see in mobilizations are conservative Muslims who are queerophobic, against critical race theory, against queer theory, engage in anti-blackness right next to anti-Zionist Jews, right next to queer communities, right next to an anti-spiritual left. And everybody's yelling, free, free Palestine. And I ask, what the hell does a free Palestine mean? And nobody can answer, for me personally, that question. Or if they can answer that question, they give random different answers. Everybody has a vision for what a free Palestine means. What does it mean in relationship to 1492 and the importance of 1492? A 48, in my humble opinion, a 1917 narrative doesn't get us anywhere. But this is where we need to situate our struggles in relationship to one another. So to me, organizing involves that. Precisely that. Transitioning. Where's the building of alternative, folks? Where's the creation of other worlds? Pass on Press is the creation of other worlds. Social centers is the creation of other worlds. What have we learned from the Black Panthers, who created free schools, clinics, gave clothes to their own people? They built something worthy of defense. Self-defense didn't come first. You build for there to be something to defend. So what has been built? And there's an entire legacy and entire discussion that we can get into. Kwame said a revolutionary, so-called revolutionary, that talks about destruction, 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 is not a revolutionary. Being revolutionary is about building. So what have we built and what are we building? That's the question. So look at Lebanon, look at Syria, look at what's coming with respect to Iran. There's a lot. Palestine is not just about Palestine. And there will be no free Palestine ever. I come from the context of Turtle Island. Without, again, contending with crusading settler colonialism in the context of the US and Canada, the very heart of empire. And the irony and the hypocrisy in the context of, again, diasporic Muslims, settler Muslims specifically, Palestinians, Arabs in the context of Turtle Island, is that they don't want to contend with the big monster in the mirror. Israel is bad. Well, what about the genocide, again, 533-year genocide in the context of Turtle Island? But everybody wants to have their cake and eat it too. Well, Malcolm said it. You cannot have the American dream while, again, when in fact it is an American nightmare. Either it's an American democracy or a settler colonial society. But we have to confront the big monster in the mirror. It's easy to point at a faraway small monster. That small monster is a blueprint of the larger monster. So I'll stop there and I'll hand it back to you, Yana, unravel some of these.
Well, thank you. Thank you for this brief or short introduction to what is going to happen now. So, what we decided when we discussed the last talk of yours was to focus on movement and mobilization efforts in Germany as well as beyond, and how your work can teach us strategies and modes of engaging with each other that go beyond our very, as I would call it, and I have only briefly seen the audience now, but from my own experience in Germany, often very, and there's a certain epistemic nationalism in Germany, or a certain exceptionalism that believes that whatever happens in Germany is exceptionally bad or exceptional in any way or form. And what I like about your work, not only is it very unapologetic and very gloves off, I would say, and it really puts the finger into the wound, let's say the colonial wound that just lingers on and gets added onto in many ways, and that many of us have difficulties untangling. And you focus on connecting a lot of theoretical and practical thoughts and praxis. Now, writing from a settler colonial Turtle Island context, you write about the indigenous struggle, you write about ongoing genocide in Turtle Island, you write about the afterlives of slavery. And when we organize in Germany very often, these topics and even lenses and optics of how to understand Palestine are very much absent, right? So indigeneity or the Native American is often understood through this very settler colonial, written out of time, dead object. Can you still hear me or see me? I think I'm frozen.
We can both see and hear you. Can you? Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
So yeah, I'm just wondering, how would you explain to this German audience, or audience in Germany right now, why these struggles matter for German movement organizing around Palestine, and why precisely is Palestine more of a portal in that sense rather than a single issue genocide
Right.
problem?
Right. It's a big question. Thank you, Anna. Well, let's start with the realm of identity politics. Okay. What the F is BIPOC? I'm serious. Black, indigenous, people of color. Okay. Are there no black people who are indigenous? Are there no indigenous that are black? Are there no black that are people of color? What the hell is LGBTIQ? All these acronyms that the white man had incepted. Anti-Deutsch, anarchists, leftists. I don't give a damn about identity politics. It matters not to me if you come up and say I'm an anarchist, I'm queer, I'm Palestinian, I'm black, I'm indigenous, I'm Muslim. There are Muslim Zionists. There are black people that are queerphobic. There are all kinds of people that are all kinds of things. What are the spiritual, ethical, political commitments that inform, again, the set of identities that we embrace? I'm a set of conjunctive ands. I'm not just a Muslim and an anarchist and a feminist and Arab and North African. But of course, the logic of white supremacy is you have to be this or that. You're not MTF, so you have to be FTM. These constant binaries that we live within, compartmentalization, prisons, cages, the cops in our head. But maybe that requires us to take a step back a moment as well and talk about a little bit of 1492 and the logic that that instituted and why I refer to this thing called war. What do I mean by war? Well, what do I mean is what we're experiencing right now is a racial and religious war. I don't believe that you can analyze race without religion. And 1492 becomes very important in that mode of analysis because two things happened in the world in 1492. And again, because I talked about this before, I'm going to try and be as concise and brief, but perhaps there's new members of the audience that need to hear this. Muslims and Jews, Muslims had been living in Spain, in Al-Andalus and Granada, for 800 years. Yeah, I don't see, by the way, Spain is a Muslim country, but anyways, we need to talk about different formulations of so-called colonialism and blah, blah, blah. Slavery, blah, blah, blah. Difference between transatlantic slavery and, you know, slavery as conceived within Muslim and Jewish and Christian societies and so on. We're mixing up terminologies. We neither know the past nor the present and so on, but that's part of the crisis of identity in a Du Boisian sense that we're facing. We don't know who we are. Muslims and Jews had been living in Spain. And Ferdinand and Isabel wanted to continue on with the crusade. Muslims and Jews were referred to as savages, 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 and heathens. Savage being the racial characterization of Muslims and Jews, and heathen being the religious. Columbus, of course, they were forcibly converted, we were murdered, we were raped, and so on. That's where the legacy began. But something else happened in 1492. Of course, Ferdinand and Isabel wanted to continue with the crusade. They wanted to engage in a reconquista of Al-Quds, of Jerusalem. So they sent Columbus, who supposedly was supposed to go to India. He ends up on the shores of the Caribbean. What does he say in his diaries when he defines Taino people who met him? Savage, heathen, race, religion. You are not human. And you are inferior racially. The size of your brain, your craniums, is far less, it's deviant and insignificant in comparison to the white man. What does Hernan Cortez, the 15th, 16th century conquistador, say when he meets Aztec people? He describes Aztec women as Moorish women, Aztec temples as Moorish mosques. He describes Montezuma, the Aztec leader, as a sultan. He describes gender non-conforming indigenous people, and I say indigenous people, not Native Americans. Because indigenous people are not wards of the state. And let me just take this tangent and say, the problem and the irony behind this hyphenated identities, the Native American, the African American, the Asian American, the queer American, the Arab American, the Muslim American, blah, 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 we all have to assimilate. But the only American that doesn't have to call or hyphenate their name is the white American because they're assumed to be the native of the land. But just a step before that. Sorry, that was a slight tangent. I tend to do that. And that was Hernan Cortez. What the term Berdach that was used to describe indigenous, queer, two-spirit people, that was originally cast onto Muslims insofar as gender non-conforming Muslims. The new world is built in the image of the old. They were clearly defining everything in relationship to the old world. The crusade against Islam. To me, Islam is exceptional. But in the sick mind of the white European psyche, the psychosis, the obsession with Islam, exceptionally queerphobic, exceptionally sexist, exceptionally savage. It's the Orientalist fundamentalist trope. They're terrorists, but look at us. We're going to also fetishize their belly dancing. We're also going to send, in the formation of modern Zionism, a bunch of IOF soldiers, sick, that parade women's lingeries shamelessly on social media, that are going to engage in their own savagery. In Abu Ghraib and in Guantanamo, the sexual torture of Palestinians, the murder, the charade of death. And yet we are the savages, we are the heathens. But to go and continue on, what else happened? After the ongoing genocide of over 100 million indigenous people. 100 million. Slavery now. Enslavement of black people. Middle Passage, transatlantic, okay. A third to a fifth of the Middle Passage slaves were who? Were Muslims from the Iberian Peninsula and the west coast of Africa. And this is not a religious war. This is the fiasco. Secularism is just a mass crusading project. This is the irony. behind all this. And we're not in a religious war, we're not in a racial war. Look at how Islam has become the linchpin of everybody. The Uyghur, Rohingya, and nobody, by the way, has hegemony over truth. Look at Buddhism, conservative, white supremacists being mobilized against Muslims, the Rohingya in Myanmar. Look at Kashmir, Hindutava, Dalits, Malayali. And you want to deny that Islam is a central crucifix for your white obsession? And of course, we have internalized Islamophobia as Muslims. We've been just exposed in our desire to emulate the white man, statist Islam, institutionalized Islam, authoritarian Islam from religious institutions and the nation state. This is the mess that we're in. Again, and in the context of mobilizing, this is the irony. Everybody's carrying their flags. Anarchist, Marxist, communist, hammer and sickle, Muslim, and so on and so forth. We don't even know how to talk to one another. We don't even offer an ethics of hospitality. Hospitality, let's break bread with one another. Spend time, sit, get to know one another. No. And this goes all the way to the Iraq War, in which millions and millions, far superseding the protests for Palestine. Did it change the Iraq War? Did any of the protests change anything? Occupy, the so-called Arab Spring, bread, freedom, and social justice. Shi'arat, slogans. Give me the substance, folks. So, to go back, we don't even have a conflict resolution or a way to deal with their disagreements. The left has mastered the art of us tearing each other apart. Marxists versus anarchists versus queers versus feminists versus Muslims versus I don't know who. What the fuck are we doing? How many white people that have valiantly, courageously, thank you very much, showed up to protest have gotten to know Muslims? And how many Muslims have gotten to know leftists? Indigeneity, because I want to address quickly that point, and I know it's something that's very important. We all have to me, indigeneity is not a racial and ethnic construct. To me, it's synonymous in the Islamic term, the Quranic term of the fitra, the nascency by which we are born. When was I when I was a wee within my mother's womb? I ate through my mother, I shot through my mother, I breathed through my mother. I was sheltered, naked, barren within my mother's womb. But the moment the umbilical cord is cut, I become an individual. Pink or blue, male or female, all these kind of binaries that we're socialized in relationship to. So indigeneity is something that we all need to discover, rediscover, but it can only be discovered in relationship to land, to environment, to place. We're all detached from the land. I love it when leftists, particularly in the urban metropolis, defeat capitalism, defeat capitalism, defeat capitalism. The most of us know how to grow our own food to feed ourselves, let alone our families or our communities. Yet who owns the land in the urban metropolis? Who feeds the urban metropolis? In the rural landscape that is also deemed as savage? It's white people. They feed the urban metropolis. We're disconnected from land. And what is land? She's an object. Hell with that. She's a spiritual subject. She's not an anthropomorphic object. And sorry, I'm going to critique Marxism and Leninism on this particular point. Al-ard laysat sil'a. She's not an object of utility. Land is what gives us the air that we breathe, the food that we eat, what nourishes our soul, our heart. We're actually at the bottom of the food chain. Animals above us, they may require plants and each other. We require both, and plants need neither. I shudder to think Muslims that sit down and read the Quran, the chapter of the sun, the chapter of the bees, the chapter of the ant, the chapter of the thunder, the chapter of the moon, and name it after non-human life, the chapter of the spider. Do we sit down and reflect upon the significance, the wisdom that Allah, Creator, as we bend our asses to the sky 5 times a day, I beg your pardon, about the wisdom in that, the substance in that, the literal and metaphorical in that? But what do I mean by indigeneity? Because this is what becomes important. There is no going back to 1492. There is no going back to the time of Muhammad. It's over. There is no going back to Gaza after Gaza. Invasive species have been introduced to the land. Zionists have introduced pine needles, a foreign plant that burns, that combusts, that destroys Jaffa oranges, let alone olive trees. So the land becomes something that's important. That's what our people are dying for. That's what indigenous people are dying for. Why was it 40 acres and a mule that Andrew Jackson, as a kind of reconciliation and emancipation, wanted to give black people, but then they rescinded the 40 acres because, oh my God, if black people had access to the land, the potential for revolt. But that's what the Panthers did. So there are urban zapatismos, there are rural zapatismos, but we all need to discover our indigeneity. We all need to reconnect with land. We all need to connect with our cultures and traditions. Why are we constantly throwing the baby with the bathwaters? Anarchists, overnight, purity politics, fuck religion, no gods, no masters. I'll tell you a funny story. I was at an anarchist conference in 2011. I was giving a presentation, yeah? This guy, anarchist, who works on Islam and anarchism, but he sees the link as terrorism. That's how he sees the link. He comes, he dresses in a suit, only person dressed in a suit at the conference, whatever. People dress with the way that they want, I don't care. He comes, he sits down and listen, Muhammad, we made a bunch of effigies last week of Muhammad, of Moses, of Jesus, and we burnt them. How does that make you feel? Wallahi, I don't know how Muhammad or Moses or Jesus looked like, but sure, unless you're referring to the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus. But let me ask you a question. If I dared, which I would never do, make effigies of Emma and Bakunin and Kropotkin, let me add Marx, how would that make you feel? Like, no, these are our gods. Ah, well, no gods, no masters, no? So this is the facade. Is anarchism not a religion? Is capitalism not a religion? Is Marxism not a religion? Is the nation state not a religion? Tell me who doesn't worship. If you have values, if you believe in an idea, and no idea can single-handedly deal with the crisis of the world that we're living. Holding each other's hands, we determine how a revolution will show. Christianity is an Eastern tradition. Give me Jesus, who stood in defense of Mary Magdalene, who flipped the table in the temple in terms of the interest and the money exchanging. Is that not a social justice Christianity? Is there no Christian anarchism? Okay. Give me Moses, who stood before Pharaoh. Release my people. And the moment, of course, Moses goes up the mountain, what happens with the Israelites? Build a golden calf. Give me Muhammad, who stood for the oppressed. Is there nothing redeemable then in our traditions? The self-hate. This is the irony behind all this. So re-indigenization requires an outright confrontation with our traditions. Hey, you don't like Islam, that's fine. But then where's the element of spirituality in this? In whatever it is, sense of belief. So re-indigenization is something that we all need to collectively engage in. But that can only happen in retrospect to the land. Turtle Island, the landscape has changed. Purple loosestrife now introduced to it. Indigenous people who've been removed from the land, now in urban metropolis, they're also disconnected from the land. And this is the logic. Whiteness is not a phenotype. It's not a color of skin. Even people of color now buy skin bleaching creams. Look at the degree of self-hate, self-resentment. Oh, I want to become like the white man. Straighten my hair. Ah, can I color my eyes blonde? Can I wear lenses? The degree of shame, disrespect. This is the degree of indignity. This is why Fanon said decolonization is an inherently violent act. Violent not just outside, but inside, because we're having to reconcile the sets of identities, belongings, the conjunctive ands that we supposedly aspire to, belong to. So embrace your identity to let go of it. But that is what re-indigenization requires. In the context of Germany or otherwise, we need to connect with one another, get to know who we are, or who we aspire to be, think strategically insofar as liberation, engage in propaganda that connects our struggles together. But we need to build alternatives, and that can only happen on the land, or within the urban metropolis, social centers, workers' cooperatives. Sorry, unions are not enough. Why? Workers taking over the means of production of capital, of power, like they did in Argentina in 2001. Take over factories. Take the spirit of Gaza, take the spirit of Tahrir, take the spirit of struggle. Revolutions, folks, involve practical questions. What are you going to do with a nuclear power plant? What are you going to do with the police? Are you going to have an army? How are you going to cater to the single mother, trans or whatever, that has 2 kids, that's working 3 jobs? She may care about your revolution, but sorry, you gotta put food on the table. But revolutions also involve the internal transformation of ourselves, the greater jihad. Changing the way that we fuck, changing the way that we eat, changing the way that we sleep, that we breathe. But that's the personal and collective responsibility. That's the hard work that most people don't want to do, because it means confronting ourselves in the mirror as opposed to escaping and running away. And there are all kinds of escapes: drugs, sex, alcohol, prayer, Muslims. Oh, ya Allah, free Palestine, free Kashmir, free the Rohingya, free, free, free. What the hell are you doing actively with people that are like you, that are not like you, in building that alternative world? And again, let me take a jab with respect to Islam and Muslims specifically. Do you know how many times the word Muslim is mentioned in the Quran? 5, 6 times. Do you know what the emphasis is on? Mu'mineen, believers. So what are the characteristics of the believer? The one that does not corrupt in the earth, that does not engage in interest, that minds the rights of the orphans, the poor, the elderly, the wayfarer, and so on and so forth. That connects with land. That is a sacred subject. That becomes the question. Community of believers that share ethical, political, spiritual commitments. My ummah, my community, again, is an ummah that involves all believers. But we need to share a certain set of values. You're Muslim and you're queerphobic, you're not a part of my community. And that should be across the board for everybody. So that's what re-indigenization entails. Building of alternatives, transformation of self, propaganda, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, the preparation. I'm not going to take permission from the white man, from international law. One day we hate international law. One day we like international law. Where has international law got us that only deifies the white man? The right to self-defense. Self-defense, but build something for there to be something to defend. It's not this machismo thing that one does. So we replicate oppression, Olympics, violences, amongst there are no racism, sexism, queerphobia, and so on and so forth that we replicate constantly. This is the lateral form of violence. The nation state, folks, is not this abstract entity that exists over and above us. The nation state is actually a real father. Teaches us how to discipline, control, govern one another. Look at, you all have power here. You don't like what you're listening to or hearing, you can leave. You can object. You can raise your voice. We're not institution, but what does the nation state do? It takes this fluid power that we all have, the agency that we all have, and styrates it, establishes it in a hierarchy, a vertical set of indices. You're going to object to me as a dictator, as whatever, you're going to suffer consequences. Capitalism, she's a real mother. Materializes, commodifies everything. Che Guevara on a goddamn t-shirt. Symbol of anti-capitalist system. Sell. Love, Hallmark cards, Valentine's Day. Queer love, coming out, gay marriage, surrounded by Heineken, but this capitalist materials, everything is appropriated. So, yeah, indigenization. What does the Zapatista say about queerness? They say, we're not going to call it queerness, we're going to call it other love. We need to go back to our own languages, our own traditions. We don't need to borrow everything from the white man. This is the work that needs to happen. I'll stop there. Sorry, Anna.
Yeah, now you touched already on a lot of things that I actually wanted to ask you about. But so let me get back to what my original plan was. Getting your kids onto German grounds and translating your thoughts and work into a German context. Now, you've already been criticizing Marxism early on in your last commentary. So for Marx, and this is what people in Germany have usually in the Palestine movement and those organizing around it, for Marx, the big contradiction unfolds between capital and labor. For indigenous peoples, as well as global South Marxists or post-Marxists, whatever you want to call it in this context, I guess, Land has been the additional add-on to an analysis, whether that's Steve Biko, Frantz Fanon, especially Caribbean thinkers, North American thinkers. But it's very difficult to translate that into a German context. Here or there, not here, Marxism is very often seen as the epitome of radical theory and critical thought. And you literally hear things like, well, they just don't understand Marx, or you get into like very disastrous conversations about theory and fact, and without looking at the praxis of people in the colony. Now, the interesting thing, and that is what I want to ask you now, knowledge usually travels to empire and back from empire, right? So everything you're talking about is essentially knowledge from a settler colonial context. Whether the praxis you're seeing, whether you're referring to Turtle Island indigenous struggles, or even Black liberation struggles in North America. But still, I want to ask you, how can we translate that into a German context? Because German organizing very often sees the United States of America, Canada, Mexico, Caribbean islands as consolidated nation states. The praxis of genocide, dispossession, and removal and replacement has happened. It's done. It's over. The nation state is consolidated. Why is this comparable or in relation to Palestine? And then what are we supposed to do in Germany? So when you're speaking about re-indigenizing yourself through land, how would you do that in Germany? I think in a settler colonial context, that makes much more sense. And I think for me, at least, I can't see the audience. I don't know who the audience is right now, but it makes a lot more sense. But how would we translate that into a German or European context in general, I guess?
Well, to respond to that, but maybe I'll just say that the audience is beautiful, remarkable. It's queer. They're feminists. They're people of color, very diverse, beautiful, seeking liberation. It's a blessed audience. You can feel the affect, the spirit. Let's put it that way. And how can one love without spirit? How can one die without spirit? The soul of my soul, a Palestinian grandfather said, the soul of my soul. But so I don't digress. The German context, okay. This is my first time, and as you know, and perhaps, well, I'll just say it, my time in Germany. I was very reluctant for a very long time. I have cousins who are German, half Egyptian, half German, that live in Berlin, actually. I was weary before I arrived here. I was very curious. Of course, the family, Passon Press, we had conversations together with you, Anna. I'm not well versed, and I never claim to be in a context which, again, I'm not here to parachute as a quote unquote revolutionary and be like, hey, XYZ. But I want us to think together, and perhaps you can eliminate me. I'll tell you my experience when one of our beautiful sisters, my sister, Amanda, picked me up. And I had just arrived in Berlin. I didn't even know whether I'd be able to make it in the country. And this is part of the architecture, I guess, that I wield, that I hold. But maybe this, again, will help us think through your question, Yana. I carry a Canadian citizenship. I don't identify as Canadian because of the consequence of what that identification will mean in terms of my already implication in Turtle Island. But, okay, I managed to get into the country. It was dark. So I couldn't really see structures. I could see, thank God, but I couldn't see, visibly structures. But I felt blood and soil ingrained in the very cobblestone, in the very rubble of buildings. It was an affect, it was an element of energy, of purity. And that struck me quite palpably. It was very overwhelming, actually. I can feel the ongoing Nazi, white supremacist history. Again, and 24 hours before that, ironically, of course, Mr. Elon Musk, who tweeted that I am a traitor. after Congress and so on and so forth, had just interviewed the head of the AFD. And of course, you know, her grandfather was a Nazi. And she proclaims in a rewrite of history that, of course, Hitler was a communist. Look at the sham that we're living. So again, it was just that palpable feeling of actually being physically on the ground, which was, again, disturbing. But of course, I was already inspired by the potential, alhamdulillah, to meet all of you. Now, how do we apply that in Germany? Well, you know, I was in a city about 2 hours and a half away from me. Forgive me, I forget the name of the city. Again, it's my first time in Germany. Göttingen. Thank you, yeah. And I saw the social centers. There was a good leftist scene there. I was speaking to students basically at the university. But the social centers that were there, that's what I'm talking about in terms of alternatives. I was also earlier at the social center, or what became a social center. And seeing the amount of books, the amount of posters, the community or a commune that existed within it, that's what I mean by creating a relationship with land, whether it's in urban or whether it's in rural areas. Because even within the city, we need to be organizing spaces, environments, because it's these spaces and environments that allow a degree of constancy and consistency in terms of our internal transformation. These, I'm staying with, again, Pass on Press folks, it's the sense of the home, the community that I felt, the love, the respect, the conversations that we have. It was as if the apartment that we're living in was a space that shielded us from the madness of the mountains, beyond what's happening in the streets and so on. I could hear the voice of children playing in the playground from where I'm staying. To me, whether this is in Germany, whether it's elsewhere, I think this is what becomes key. I don't want to embarrass her, but again, one of my sisters from Pass on Press, well, two of them, they were teaching me about a piece of land that they got vis-a-vis German laws that I know are heavily bureaucratic and so on and so forth. Not too far away from Berlin. Of course, I never got a chance to see this piece of land, but I mean physically, but they showed me images and so on and so forth of it. But that's what I mean, even within a society as Germany, let us reclaim certain elements of land. Let us pool our resources to buy land outside the city. Let us learn how to farm, to grow food, to develop the means of autonomy, to be able to feed ourselves, to be able to feed others. Because if we can feed ourselves on a plot of land, even if it's 45 minutes away from Berlin, we no longer have to shop in grocery stores. We don't need to dismantle the state. I don't like it when people say dismantle, dismantle, dismantle. We neither have the capacity, nor the energy, nor the labor, nor the resources to dismantle shit. We need to divest. Divestment is something altogether different. Divest from the nation state and capital. But this requires actual building of alternatives on the ground. Whether, again, it's in the rural areas, whether it's in the metropolis. So this is why social centers become important. Let us establish clinics. Let us establish free schools as sort of a parallel stronghold of power that is anti-authoritarian, that is grounded in certain values, horizontalist values, even if it is within the urban metropolis. But still the emphasis becomes on the building of alternatives. So whether Germany or not, I do think that there's something to that. And I'm not taking away from the exceptional repressive politics that are unfolding in Germany at all. Like from everything that I hear, it's, again, I don't want to engage in these kinds of comparisons. It's brutal. It's harsh. And you all have my heart and my sympathy and my respect for holding your grounds. But to me, again, we go back to this point of mobilization. It's not about numbers. The Quran says, وَكَمْ مِنْ فِئَةٍ قَلِيلَةٍ غَلَبَتْ فِئَةٍ كَبِيرَةٍ. How much of a small group defeated a larger enemy. But the Quran also says, وَأَعِدُّوا لَهُمْ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُم مِنْ قُوَّةٍ, and prepare for them what is necessary in strength. And that means alternatives. So I think this is what becomes key, Germany or not. building a sense of community.
No, I think this is all, I mean, theoretically and as a tactic, I agree, but I'm going to play the devil's advocate now from a German perspective. I think a lot of people of color would argue that they wouldn't want to move outside Berlin into some rural area, especially not if they're of color or look Muslim, Arab, brown, in whatever way or form, or black, precisely because of fears of being racially attacked by a white supremacist mob or individual or group. Which are actually quite legitimate fears, especially now in contemporary Europe. I don't want to single out Germany in particular, but another thing that came to mind. So that's one thing. Another thing that came to mind, not only money, obviously, to buy land. You can always chime in together and build collectives and all that. But there is a new citizenship law that has just recently been pushed through in Germany, and you can essentially have your citizenship revoked within the time span of 10 years if you are found to be guilty of, in this case, for instance, since we're talking about Palestine, anti-Semitism. So everybody who does not have already German citizenship, so prior to the prior to last summer, didn't have German citizenship already and could potentially be found guilty of posting something on Instagram, such as, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which is one of the offenses that are criminally charged as an anti-Semitic deed, you could actually have your citizenship revoked. And I'm again repeating to the audience, I don't know how many people are in the position of a German citizenship or who are applying for it or, are seeking refuge in one form or another. This is essentially the form of dispossession and replacement that the German racial state uses. So I'm just wondering what kind of alternatives. I think North America is its own particular context, and I think translating this knowledge of settler colonial genocide, dispossession, and continuous slow death. How can we translate that to a European continental experience is still my question in that regard, in fact, because it is not the same. I'm not saying that the structures are not similar or even informed by the same ideologies, right? But the way they materially manifest are still slightly different. So what would you say essentially to, someone applying for German citizenship, right? Or a POC in Germany, with regards to indigenizing yourself via land and, building your own food, which is all, I have so many friends who all agree, they would all agree with that. We all want that. We all want to do that. But then when we actually practically think about doing it outside in Brandenburg, like everybody goes like, ooh, that's cringe, because it's actually about your own security and or citizenship.
Maybe it's time for white Germans to really step it up.
White Germans don't think of themselves as white Germans. I think that's another thing that happens in the settler colony, right? A lot of, whether that's in radical movement organizing as well, whiteness is not necessarily, or even in scholarship, in fact, whiteness or critical race theory or white supremacy as a conceptual tool to think through is not what people even go to first, I would argue. They understand something about
Oh,
Orientalism, but white supremacy is usually a terminology and a concept that a lot of people back off from, not only the anti-Deutsche, but also in academia, in German academia. I'm speaking precisely about German academia. I'm not saying,
okay.
So yeah, that was just a
No.
the German
Again,
context.
I am learning the scene here. You all know it better, and I have as much to learn from you and to think through this question. This is why I'm grateful that you're actually pressing me on it, because again, it allows us to think together. But you're referring to explicitly the academic scene. But this is why I'm trying to think with you and say, well, maybe it's time to understand that the academic scene and academia is just a site of resistance and not liberation. And I don't mean to be rhetorical with regards to that. And maybe our investments should go beyond then academia. And why I responded back and said, well, if the goal is actually liberation, I understand the concern within academia because that's not going to go away, you know. But maybe diverting our energy towards what's happening on the ground and using whatever resources and people and privileges that different people have in order to find a way out vis-a-vis the creation of alternatives that way, vis-a-vis people that are more privileged racially, financially, to build something. Because I'm not, and I'm not saying obviously that you are either, invested anymore into the question of academia, to be quite honest, Anna. I never really was. I don't think people like us are, especially us that are very outspoken. I think it's just a site of resistance that needs to be challenged, yes, that if we're doxxed, there are consequences to that, yes, that, you know. When I was at that university a couple of days ago, I met this Lebanese student, hijabi. She was in her second year of medical school, and she was telling me how, and she was so passionate about it, and you can tell her degree, her studies, how because of her activism in relationship to the encampment, she ended up being expelled, and she can no longer continue her education. And it broke my heart, because we all know women, let alone Muslim women, let alone visibly Muslim women. Okay, sure, I'm challenged as a man, but I'm not challenged the same way as a woman is challenged. But that's my point, that how can we build alternative forms of knowledge production that are not academic sites? We see kindergartens that belong to the state. Okay, how can we build alternative forms of care beyond the state? Does that require resources? Yes. Do we vary in our capacities? But this is where perhaps, or maybe I'm deluded, but I'm a dreamer, and that by sharing what it is that we have, perhaps we will be able to attain some alternatives that, again, it doesn't resolve the fact that a person of color citizenship can be revoked within the span of 10 years if they are accused of being anti-Semitic or whatever. But at least that we will be able, or Germans with white privilege will be, or could lead the front if they are part of our movements. And because these Germans who enjoy whiteness, they're not also individuals. They're networks of relations of power. So they come from histories, they come from families. And there is an element of materiality that perhaps can be exploited in that particular position in the favor of people of color to help establish out spaces beyond, again, the institutions that exist, as well as at the same time try and act as a shield, if that makes sense, given their privilege, to people of color, assisting in terms of lawyers, like really stuck up across the board, being quote-unquote bodyguards when events like this happen, really putting more and more on the line. But again, this is where I revert back to you to tell me about, the limitations of that and what I'm suggesting, insofar as that scope. Because again, this is a new scene to me. And yeah, absolutely, it's similar, but also very distinct from Turtle Island. To me, the sort of the vantage point is that Germany is part of the old Europe. So if I focus on empire and Euro America or whatever, then hopefully old Europe will sort of the domino effect. But again, I'll just, what do you think? Insofar as that in particular, that particular trajectory or that suggestion, the abandonment, again, to go to this, that insofar as this key point, that the concern should be not academia or what is happening within academia, but what's happening out on the streets, the world of the below.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't just speaking about academia.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just academia as an add-on.
Yeah.
I mean, in your book, you make this very interesting distinction between, I mean, not you, Deleuze and Guattari are making this distinction between totalitarianism and fascism, right? And fascism essentially being a psychosocial formation, right? That structures family and the way we think, desire, and live our relationships, and what we deem possible and not. So thinking through critical race theories and what is going on in Germany these days, I think a lot of people that I speak with feel disillusioned in terms of having this mass of privileged white Germans, as you call them right now, coming into their fold or supporting them. I think you have a very non-German, queer POC, German POC, German Muslim, German Palestinian crew that is right now on the streets, which even in numbers is not even comparable to the Black Lives Matter protests that took place a couple of years ago, where I think we had around 180,000 people on the streets all over Germany. And now with Palestine, I don't know if there's any statistics out. I haven't seen it as to how many people have been on the streets, but it's not even close to that number. So there is really a need to have a conversation on what next. And I think that kind of comes back to Stokely Carmichael or Kwame Ture that you've cited in your work as well. It's not about mobilizing and getting people onto the street only, right? It's about mobilizing against the system. But people feel, and me included, I think, quite disillusioned in the way of what is still possible. Capitalism, at least in Europe, has carved out literally the space, like literally carved out any space or didn't leave any space for us to maneuver. That's one thing. And another thing I think is that the docility that has kind of seeped into society through the consumer citizen, that we don't know how to organize differently anymore other than demonstrating on the streets mainly, you know. So I'm just,
Yeah.
you know, I have no answers.
Yeah.
I just know that I think the North American context is still different. And again, you know, like I'm using the same theories and we're completely on the page and everything. But I think translating it into this continental European context is still needs to be done, really. And I think we see this problem of translation. In particular, I don't give a shit about academia, really. Yes, you're right. It's a side of resistance, not a side of learning or decolonizing or whatever. But we see it most concretely on the streets, because like what is happening essentially is that people lose their citizenship, they have their homes raided, they get beaten up. And most of the things or most of the, let's say, the leeway that you have is maybe suing someone via, you know, liberal law, which brings us back to the old school Marxist, right? First you get dispossessed and then you can sue for your rights. So I'm just, I don't know. I don't have any answers. This is a conversation. I hope the others in the audience might want to chime in as well. I'd only have a few questions left, really. So I'm happy.
Can I just pick up maybe just that thread? Because what if, and again, there's a huge immigrant and migrant community of all shapes, creeds, color here. And of course, the pushback in terms of mobilizing needs to happen on the streets. The streets are also public spaces. But there's something inside me that also wants to say, what if we just organized in stealth and quiet? Which means that I will go back to conservative. I mean, if the formula of, okay, mobilization also has its limits insofar as the fact of that their struggles are not really deeply entrenched or interconnected to one another as we presume them to be. What part of that is discursive in the sense that I need to go back to Muslim communities, conservative Muslim communities, and talk about queerness. Different people, again, according to the, anarchists that exists, or at least the anarchists that have some kind of sensibility, need to reconsider this question of spirituality. There needs to be a discursive revision such that we're able to meet each other at the level of values or social justice to be able to create something on an organizational standpoint, besides also our wails and our screams, because as we discussed, that also has its limitations. And part of me, again, just to emphasize this point, is always just like, why does the left talk too much? And why do we announce everything that we think, do, say? Why can't we spend more time getting to know one another? And again, that's very hard. That's deep, involves a deep-seated level of investments, and revise who we are so that, and again, I'm not looking to convince a mass majority of Muslims or whatever with regards to queerness, but I'm looking for a percent here, a percent there of anarchists, a percent there of whatever community that revises itself in such a way that we're able to see one another, and then we're able to, I don't know, build a social center. I mean, I know Pass on Press includes, at least one German. It includes white people. It includes, Chilean. It includes a Muslim. But they're bound together. And again, I saw it with my own eyes, like social centers here, there, etc. So it's that possibility where it's just like, that's what I mean, a kind of like stealth kind of organizing, without taking away from the fact that, yeah, of course, we need to confront things on the level of what's happening in the streets. But yeah, that's just something that came to mind. But it does also require a vision of self and addressing one's community. And okay, well, why is it that we not only need to be on the streets with anarchists or queers or whatever, but actually reconfiguring the sense of, say, an Islam of the oppressed, the Quran of the oppressed, a queer Islam, to be able to not only cater to people that are disenfranchised within our own Muslim communities, and of course this goes up across the board to other communities, but also in relationship to other communities precisely. To build, because if, again, organization is not a matter of numbers, then all you need, again, and I'm not trying to be theoretical here, I'm actually trying to ground it, is to find that collectivity or that small group that is able to build something together, but with a different set of values as an alternative, regardless of whether it's semi-permanent, permanent, or even temporary. But that's, again, we're trying to tease out certain things, and hopefully the audience can help us out too.
No, I really like that. What I hear you say is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're speaking about the liminal space essentially where those who didn't make it into the mainstream, or that what has already been killed as opportunities and possibilities for us, is kept alive, even if it's just a small flame, in order to pass it on to the next generation and to build on it. And I think that's very important, especially in a time where capitalism deeply runs through us, where everybody wants to be recognized for their achievements and I don't know, be seen or whatnot. And it's time of Instagram and everything. I think that's a very important thing. And it also kind of ties back to the indigenous struggles that you have touched upon, where survivals of culture, languages, and entire life worlds was possible within these liminal spaces, right? But I think I also, unless you want to have, like, you want to say a few closing words, I want to open this to the audience because we are already way over time, and I really want to hear what people have to say or ask as well.
Yeah, I could. I'm not sure. Yeah, I could try to help in just opening up the space to everyone else. Actually, maybe I will abuse my privilege as a moderator by just adding one question to the stack. Maybe we can. How does it sound that we take, let's say, 3 or 4 questions, and then you can try to go through a first pass. So my question to you.
direct to the point, direct action. I wonder here how many of you, not only as Germans but as Europeans, can pass on the white privilege to immigrants that you know, that you trust, your friends, in your organizations, collectivities, that you can get married with to save the time and give them the tranquility of staying here when everything will change in February, maybe for the worst for many of them. So maybe you can do that instead of going to one of the AFD against demos or anything like that. So that's direct action for me. Thank you.
I have a question. Oh, loud. I have a question about land as a spiritual subject. Can you elaborate on this? What does that mean to treat land as a spiritual subject, not only not as an object, not something to be pilfered or extorted or extracted from, but in a positive sense? Can you lay claim to a subject? What is the kind of, I don't want to anthropomorphize it, but where I'm coming from, I want to think about the agency of the land, the autonomy of the land. I would just love to hear more about this positive notion of engaging with the land as a subject. We take more questions?
Maybe you can. Maybe let's have you do one pass, and then we could open it up again.
I'll do one pass. Thank you. Hello, hello. Yeah. I'll do one pass because I think two were comments, and so or three were comments. But insofar as your question, Basa, so vis-a-vis Islam and anarchism, how far do we engage the state? To me, yeah, we can gain advantages or certain advantages from the state, but the state is never going to be a neutral entity. And to me, divesting and looking within while trying to, the state cannot be a strategic site by which we're constantly demanding something, because it will be very strategically limited. And this is what Frantz Fanon, this is what Charles Taylor, this is what Glenn Coulthard refers to as the politics of recognition. You're constantly trying to recognize something from the state to gain advantage from it. But you're also being codified within that apparatus. And you're less likely, because of whatever advantages that one is investing within, to then be able to establish, I mean, again, yeah, you can use those resources, but the state is also, codified within individualist sort of spectrums. To me, whatever advantages that we can get, that shouldn't be the emphasis. The emphasis should be on the world of the below. Again, if it's not a matter of numbers, there are resources within, again, that we have within our communities that when we reach out to, particularly if we consider the fact that engaging with the concept of fascism as a mass psychology, and this is what Islam and anarchism is so much about, dealing with the fascism inside ourselves, dealing with the fascism insofar as Muslim communities, their internalization of queerphobia, dealing with the fascism insofar as anarchists, insofar as anti-religious dimensions that exist, and so on and so forth. To me, that's more likely, because the more that we get entangled in the conceptualization of dual power, the more likely we're going to gravitate to rely on that, and to conceiving of, again, resistance as opposed to the specter of liberation and decolonization, and to self-reliance on each other. So that would be my response insofar as that. Insofar as to the comment with regards to reification of division and white Europeans and so on, as I said, whiteness is not a phenotype, it's not a color of skin. It's a culture. Black people have internalized cultures of whiteness insofar as capitalism, insofar as the nation. Same thing with indigenous, the same thing with people of color. It's black skin, white masks, brown skin, white masks, red skin, white masks. This is part of the logic. So whiteness, again, to emphasize this point, is a culture, is a way of being in the world. And that is what I was critiquing. Now, the issue with regards to white Europeans or European converts, like 9/11, okay, or even the moment of Palestine. A lot of people have converted to Islam. And okay, good for you. What Islam are you reverting or converting to? Because it's not a matter of numbers. You have 2 billion Muslims. We have our resources, we have our languages, we have our lands, we have this, we have that. Yet we're as fickle as the foam on the oceans of the wave when it crashes into the rock. So it's not a matter of numbers. So this is what becomes key. White Europeans still enjoy white privilege. Islam does not erase your white privilege. And the matter that you dress in Muslim garb and so on and so forth, that doesn't mean that you face the same privilege because you can be white passing. You don't face the same shit that a person of color whose name is Muslim and whose birth place is written on a passport or an ID faces when they cross into an airport or when they are faced and confronted by the police. Sorry. You still enjoy white privilege. Embracing Islam does not erase that. So no, this is not to debase white reverts or white Europeans in relationship, but again, whiteness is a culture, whether you are white or whether you are non-white. Okay? This is something that becomes key. And again, we have congresswomen and settler colonies and so on and so forth that have embraced, have assimilated into the system. And everybody wants to be a part of the system. So it's breaking out of that logic. Insofar as the comments with regards to people that enjoy white privilege and how they can extend that to others, thank you so much for that suggestion. And I think, again, white people can extend themselves that enjoy privileges in so many different ways because there are class privileges beyond racial privileges and so on and so forth. Particularly people that have a rooted relationship to this nation, this Nazi nation and country. Now, insofar as land as a spiritual subject. In Islam, I talk about the concept of mulk. Mulk, insofar as belonging or insofar as property, is different within Islam than it is, again, generally speaking, from so far as a Protestant ethic and so on and so forth. Because we do not own anything in Islam. Creator owns everything, even my own body. If I go engage in acts of destruction, whatever it is, smoking or whatever, in relationship to my body, I'm ultimately accountable. Because my body is simply a vessel, a temporary vessel that is an extension of the land. So it is about the element of reciprocity with the land. And allowing the land to also teach us. In Islam, there's the concept of al-ghaib. There are many Muslims that do not know or don't pay attention, or perhaps even people that are non-Muslim or non-Arabic speakers that don't know that there are many verses in the Quran that are referred to as Surah al-Ghaib, the chapters of al-Ghaib, of the unknown. Alif Lam Mim. 3 Arabic letters conjoined to form an Arabic word in the 2nd chapter of the Quran. No Muslim, no Arab can tell you what that verse means. And it is meant to humble Arabs, to humble us with regards to what non-human life with the land has to teach us about our own petty existence in relationship to liberation or otherwise. So honoring land means relearning the land, reciprocating back to the land. Vis-a-vis, again, alternative concepts that go beyond possessing land as an instrument of utility or object within itself. So I hope that that gives an example, again, from at least a Muslim perspective, and there are many different perspectives and cultures and traditions that perhaps one can draw on from their own in order to, conceive of land, or not reproduce that hegemonic relationship to land within itself. So, yeah. Okay, we'll take some more.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mohammed. And I think I agree with you that we should build like alternative, but there is a lot of theoretical and political questions and problems. But maybe there is no. Maybe the other will like ask some like we discuss it also already. But I have one comment or one question. Also, to build like alternatives, we should also to build it also in language. So I think there is also a struggle in languages. Also, for alternative for liberation, we need also like a language of liberation. There is no alternatives. There is no liberation without a language of liberation. Maybe you are right with when you said that some labels, some words are already get used from capitalism, but I think that we are the source of this word, but the capitalism come after that and you reuse it and reinterpret these words against us. But I think we need to do this kind of narrative struggles, because without it, there is no alternatives. I don't think speaking, like saying, is also doing, and also making politics. And I think POC or LGBTQ or queer, they are also like originally from like not from capitalism context or like from conservative context, but as you speak as about Black Panthers, the Black Panthers did recreate the word black. That was, the word was like used in racial context before, but black power in the context of Black Panthers, there is like an alternative, progressive, revolutionary, and alternative, a reinterpretation of the word in a new dimension. So I think language, narrative, words are really also a part of building alternatives. Thank you.
I think after hearing you, I feel I'm a victim of my own identity politics. And maybe I would like to ask you to get back to one point that you mentioned at the beginning. I feel I am a victim of my own identity politics because a lot of my politics that I've been doing lately in my life are based off, I'm a person of color, I'm an immigrant, I'm queer, yeah? This has broken to me friendships, etc., etc. And I got very curious about how to get further of this. I find my own identity politics into the way of liberation, and maybe it would be interesting for me to hear or to have some ideas of how to get further there.
So for me, I thought it was very interesting when you touched on the double standards in a lot of, let's say, Muslim or Arab communities, and I'm sure that extends. You see it also in like Black America. So for me, I grew up Muslim, and obviously thought like very anti-queerly for a while, and then I got to a point where I dropped my faith and realized, okay, this is not right. And then my perspective changed on a lot of things, and I started to see all these institutionalized modes of thinking that I had about the world, and that had to change. And then, okay, let's say now we want to challenge this way of thinking across a lot of the Muslim communities, but not everybody's going to want to drop their faith for it. And I mean, it's interesting that you say you practice Islam and you're Muslim, so maybe there's also different definitions to what it is to be practicing Islam. How do we go about like confronting the double standards in a lot of these communities without necessitating what I did, which was, oh, this doesn't work for me? So how do we have like a productive conversation that can actually change people's points of views on this?
Yeah, okay.
Can I-
The first person I saw was in the back there, so let's do that and then one more round.
One here as well.
Okay, since you have the microphone, you go and then you can go.
Great. Hi, and hi, Anna. My question is to community building, and you said in the last block, all you need is to find a small group that would commit to build with a different set of values. And I would like to hear more about these different set of values. What do you mean by this? And could you also say something about the role of transgenerational trauma? Thank you.
Someone in the back there also. Yeah.
So my question is regarding creating communities. So creating communities at the end of the day requires leaders to create them or to push them, and creating and these leaders that might become like centers of power, which eventually recreates the system again, because this was like humanity or civilization like 10,000 years ago. Tribes, people connect with each other and then create like systems, leaders, and so on. So wouldn't it be just like repeating the cycle again, this idea of creating communities?
Wow, mashallah, great questions. All right. Hakeem, if it's not clear what the crisis is of meaning of language. We are living this Orwellian moment, folks, 1984. First they steal the meanings, then they steal the language. Orwell had prophesized it. Civilians killed are referred to as collateral damage. CIA tortures, extraordinary renditions, euphemisms. Again, maybe I'm, not clear. The fight is discursive and has to deal with language. That is a part. This is why, again, developing a Quran of the oppressed, a Talmud of the oppressed, the Torah of the oppressed, the Bible of the oppressed. This is part of the battle. An anarchism that isn't anti-religious, and this is what the investment has been for 15, 20 years. Religious anarchism is a text that you can pick up that I contributed to, and so on and so forth. Christian anarchisms, Buddhist anarchisms, alternative ways of envisioning, again, anarchism, anti-authoritarianism, actually non-authoritarianism, because being anti-anything, what are the non-authoritarian concepts that define a Quran of the oppressed? A Christianity of the oppressed. This is what part of the battle is. Beyond the transformation of self, the greater jihad, fighting one's inner microfascisms, individually, but also in community and collectively. But yes, absolutely, that is part of the battle. It is a battle over language and reclamation of language. Now, for me, there's a difference between queerness and adoption of queerness. And again, I did my PhD on Islam and queer Muslims, and it involved queer Nubians, queer Sudanese, trans-sex workers in the context of Egypt, gay men in the Egyptian military, as well as queer black and non-black Muslims in the context of Turtle Island. To understand how anti-blackness functions globally, differently, similarly in the context of Africa, let alone in Turtle Island. Okay. Queerness is just sexism dressed in drag. Queerness is just sexism dressed in drag. The irony with regards to queerness is the fact that originally as a discourse, it was a critique of all identity politics. Before it became mainstreamed and became an identity. One of my participants says in the research, am I supposed to embrace an identity for no identity? This is really about patriarchy. What, gay men can't be patriarchal? They try and replicate precisely the dynamics of heteronormativity in their dynamics with trans, with women, with lesbians, and so on and so forth. But then developing the language means going beyond queerness as an identity from our own traditions. And this is what becomes a question. Sometimes my participants accepted queerness from tactical perspectives. What I mean by that is, well, the first thing that they Googled when they were trying to see whether Islam is reconciliatory with queer is they were write Islam gay or Islam queer to try and make a connection with people outside, vis-a-vis social media or otherwise. Sometimes they adopted it as queerness as an identity. Sometimes they let go of it in certain positions. This is the difference between strategy and tactic. Sometimes they went to Muslim discourses and traditions, pre-modern discourses, in which entire books have been written about same-sex practices without adopting the label, or using Arabic terminologies, native terminologies. But we don't need to take everything from the West. Story. Again, because I'm trying to get to the point of patriarchy here. The first thing that often, at least in the context of my research with regards to Muslims, particularly in Egypt, that gay men specifically get asked when they share what they share with their families and tell them that they're queer or gay or whatever label that they tell them, the first question that they get asked is, do you give or do you take? Do you fuck or do you get fucked? Because if you fuck, well, that's okay. You're performing the role of the cis heteronormative male. If you're getting fucked, then you're debasing yourself to the role of women. Well, Islam says, and we've created you from a single spirit and created a spectrum. It's not the Christian, white, Protestant, Catholic that, oh, Eve is created from the rib of Adam. One spirit that was spread. And in that spreading, it created a spectrum. And a spectrum of what? Of masculinities, of femininities, and we all embody these masculinities and femininities. Sometimes we fuck while we're on top, sometimes on our side, sometimes we're at the bottom. It's fluid. Yet we want to compartmentalize these as identities. Extension of that story. 2011, when everything erupted in Egypt, just to point on this point of, because I think blackness and queerness or LGBTIQ is something different, right? In 2011, I'm in Egypt, the uprising has taken place. I'm sitting and all these Islamic shows started to appear on television. And this particular show is on sex education, okay? So there was a sheikh, a Muslim scholar, and of course, the person that the interviewer, the running of the who's running the program. And so they're taking in callers. So this Muslim woman calls in, oh, Muslim scholar, I have a question to ask. Of course, ask. The Prophet was open with regards to everything relating to gender and sexual practices. But, sir, I'm afraid that you might take it the wrong way, blah, blah, blah. Sister, ask your question. There's a lineup of people waiting to get and speak and ask questions. But sir, it might be disrespectful. Sister, say, well, my husband doesn't orgasm unless I finger him from his asshole. You're so rude, you're disrespectful, you're a kafir, you're this, you're that. This is a foreclosure. The Prophet, long hair he had. He applied kuhl to his eyes, eyeshadow. Okay? He cooked, he cleaned, he sewed. He played with his children. He played with his wives, even in public. Okay, look at ISIS. And this is the degree of schizophrenia that we have in terms of identity. ISIS, how do they represent themselves? The men, long hair. They apply kuhl. But when it comes to the feminist practices that Prophet engaged in, so far as cooking or cleaning and so on, sewing and so on and so forth within the domestic or even in the public, it's the particular superficial image of femininity that they adopt. Al-Qaeda, of course, to represent themselves differently. All different forms of, I hate this word, political Islam, because it assumes that Islam is inherently politicized as opposed to the fact that any idea is political. But that's my point, again. So I don't lose track and go on a certain zillion different tangents. It's about masculinities and femininities. Jesus embodied different masculinities and femininities. Prophets embody different masculinities. We have both. And we're constantly doing this between both poles. But society teaches us, no, the man can't cry. Well, feminism teaches us a great deal about the empowerment that comes with expression of feelings, of crying, of joy, of breaking down, of trauma, that question that was asked. So this is the schism that needs to be addressed. What constitutes and the fluidity of masculinities and femininities that flow, that are fluid within us at any given moment, at any given time. So, insofar as language and so far as LGBTQ, this is where I think queerness needs to focus. Queerness is just patriarchy dressed in drag. We need to focus on patriarchy. This is the key thing to me. And we need to restore what is private. Sorry, like, coming out and disclosing to the state or to capitalism the most intimate recesses of who we like to fuck and what we want to do in bed. It's highly problematic. And then you want privacy? How? It's very satirical and ironic and contradictory, dare I say. So we need to restore the private and restore the public. Because again, we live in a world in which there are cameras on every cell phone, on everything, on computers, on laptops. We have no privacy. Anybody can turn them on and that's it. We're fucked. We're caught in compromisable positions. But again, this is where queerness and Islam, in the context of queer Palestinians that are entrapped by the IOF, and that is mobilized against them within their own communities and societies, this is where a queer feminist Islam becomes fundamentally important. So going back to the point of language, yes, we are in a battle of language. We are in a battle of discourse. Everybody has to do that. That is the purpose and that is the mission behind why Yeah, for 25 years, I've been working more or less on this book and on the ground. And it is a social movement book at the same time. Theory is a form of liberatory praxis. That's what bell hooks teaches. Language. Thank you so much for the element of identity politics. I hoped that that began to untangle because, again, and speaking to the question or the point with regards to trauma, that is the trauma that we have to work through as people of color. That is the internalized violence that I mean when I quoted decolonization as a violent act. We literally have to break ourselves apart. What is our conceptualization and relationship to Islam? Because we're all being fucked by authoritarian religious institutions, state institutions, in our predominantly Muslim society. And so when we come to the so-called West, and I hate this term, East-West are a false binary. It's sort of like the Middle East. It's a Eurocentric term. This is why I like to use the term Euro-America. Because again, the quote-unquote East and West are actually a set of polyamorous, polyvalent relations that have existed throughout history. So they're false constructs. But when we come to the West, we possess, particularly in the settler colony, I noticed this, and vis-a-vis, again, my research. The settler colony is very strangulating, suffocating. But it provides this moment whereby we were able to re-envision ourselves anew. To look from the outside back in. And to overcome certain perceptions that unfortunately we've been indoctrinated with, because a lot of Muslims come to the West, internalize Islamophobia. I've seen a lot of queers that were active during Tahrir Square, and they come to the West and they just want to party, they want to live, etc. And they were very politically active in Tahrir. And I get it. You just want to live. You've been suffocated for so long. But why lose yourself to this extent and degree? Because at least in the context of Turtle Island, you have now become a settler, complicit in indigenous dispossession, in genocide of black people. If you really embrace that kind of relation, or I just want to assimilate. And I'm not saying here that, again, settlers of color are equal to white settlers. They don't enjoy the same privileges, but they are still complicit. Privilege and complicity circulate in different ways. The Afghani that leaves their home because of the war in Afghanistan, imperialism, colonialism, and you don't have an anti-imperialist ethic without having an anti-settler colonial ethic. Two are both tied together. That leaves and migrates to the US. Okay. That wants to live. That embraces. They don't enjoy the same privilege as a white man. That doesn't mean they're not complicit in indigenous dispossession or anti-blackness. So this is part of the work that needs to be done. We have anti-blackness within South Asian, West African, and North African community. And when Muslims are called out with regards to it, it's like Bilal, the Mu'adhin, or of the Prophet. Bilal was a Muslim who had such a beautiful voice. He was a black Muslim. And Muslims usually use Bilal as an example of, oh, look, well, we have the character of Bilal. No, where's the abolitionist perspective that exists within Islam? Because Muslims reneged on the initial, again, impetus, zeal even, towards a social justice Islam. Because we became very lax. And this becomes the problem. Communities, when they reach a particular stage within their own civilization, they become very crystallized and hegemonic. And they don't push back or further insofar as their revolutionary potential. There are many abolitionist verses in the Quran that extol the freeing of the so-called slave. And most slaves, by the way, were not black or people of color. They were Circassian. And no, slavery did not mean the same thing in Islam as it did insofar as transatlantic slavery. So that we're very clear. Plantation slavery is very different than other forms of slavery. And that doesn't mean I'm condoning slavery either in pre-modernity. But you didn't own the slave. The slave had rights. The slave could get married, could own property, blah, blah, blah. But again, this is how language is deployed very precariously and wantonly. So, it's okay. When you talk about blackness, and just to go back to Hamid and show that the riotous moment that we're in, okay? We have black-on-black ethnocentrism in the context of Turtle Island, okay? African migrants perceive that black people, they say to them, 400 years you haven't overcome slavery? Give me a break. Oh, you're just good as musicians or once in a while, Obama or Oprah or whatever it is, or sports people. Stop your whining, Obama says, shaming black absentee fathers. No, actually, black people are wailing. It's a cry of elegy. This is why it was called Bob Marley and the Wailers. Poets understand the value of words. But what does Obama say to black people? Stop your whining. Just rise up. It's your problem. No, it's a structural problem of settler colonialism. And black people, or quote unquote African Americans, look, when African diasporas move from the African continent and become settlers in Turtle Island, they also look at them. You're taking our jobs, you don't understand our struggles, and so on and so forth. This is the creasing of black, indigenous, and people of color by white settler colonialism. I did not talk about how black people were conscripted towards indigenous genocide. Indigenous people were also conscripted towards black enslavement, at least in certain tribes and within certain families even. But you don't have Afro-indigenous futurities without each other. This is why you have black Cherokees and black Mi'kmaq, and you don't have black self-determination without indigenous sovereignty. Both are tied hand in hand. So there was no way for Black Lives Matter to succeed without addressing at the same time indigenous sovereignty, particularly in the context of stolen land. And of course, the irony is that in the wake of Black Lives Matter, Africa, that is the size of the US, Canada, China, Japan, Europe, that's how big Africa is, was neglected. What, Black Lives Matter don't matter in the context of Africa? This is the facade that we're living, the constant reproduction of an oppression Olympics, as opposed to the situating of each other in each other's struggles. So yeah, there's a lot to do with the disentangling, but I would say the element in being we're all victims of identity politics means that we can only figure things out not only on our own, but in relationship to one another and as a collective and as a community. Just to speed things up a little bit.
Ahmed,
yes.
real quick, I don't want to interrupt you, but I need to leave right now.
Of course.
It's already 11
Oh yeah, Anna.
p.m. over here, and my best friend is visiting, and she's leaving very soon in exactly 25 minutes. So it was a pleasure being in conversation, or at least posing a couple of questions to the audience. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure listening also to your wonderful questions as well. Thank you for organizing, and I really hope that even with the ceasefire now, this flame that has been sparked will not die out, no matter how liminal your organizing will be in the future, given all the counterinsurgency repression that we're all facing in our different contexts. I hope you don't give up. Sumud is the most important thing. Please stick to it. Don't give up. Don't forget other conflicts. Don't forget Congo, Yemen, Afghanistan, Kashmir, everything that we've been talking about today. And thank you so much, Mohammed, again.
Shukran, ya Anna. It was an honor. Thank you. The crisis of faith. Because all our lives are creased by whiteness and white supremacy and white settler colonialism specifically, because again, for me, Euro-America is the heart of empire, so it's a big problem. I'm not looking to convince, again, to be very specific, all Muslims with regards to a queer Islam or a liberatory Islam or revolutionary Islam. Again, mass movements don't change the world. A small group does. I'm sorry, I'm going to use this controversial example. Whatever our views are with regards to Hamas, the boogeyman, Hamas, okay? Did anybody expect it? Did anybody see it coming? No. Were they huge in numbers? No. Whether we like it or not, they were a determined few that knew what they were doing. They may not have realized the full potential of what was going to happen. The failure of international law, the failure of the fact that they were counting on Euro-America intervening eventually to stop this genocide, the failure of Arabs and Muslims who betrayed them in the back, who never rose up. This is the problem. Tahrir. What was the moniker? Egyptians overcame fear. What overcoming of fear? We are the second jailers of Gaza since 79. What have we done? Oh, but cry, we feel for Palestinians. Why aren't we breaking the siege on Rafah? Why? By the millions. What is the person up above, and we all know his name, Mr. Sisi? Is he gonna kill 1 million? 2, 3, 4, 10, 20, 30? The Egyptian population is 130. 50, 60? Standing up for values. Our people are dying. So again, it's not a matter of numbers, it's a matter of conviction. And when we have conviction, the few can change the world. Malcolm was not large in numbers, the Zapatistas were not large in numbers, the Panthers were not large in numbers, but they were organized and they knew what they were doing. They had a plan, they had a strategy, they followed through without compromise. This is why I started off by saying, fuck mediocrity. Fuck that place of safety. Fuck that haven that we think we're gonna hide and crawl into. Fuck that cave. Fuck cowardness. My life is no more or less valuable than a 14-year-old kid, than a 15-year-old, than a child. 0 age being pulled from the rubble. 0. By the tens of thousands. And we'll see what we can discover of the numbers of our dead siblings and kin. This is the facade. Okay. So the need for leaders. I'll go back. When you construct a discourse and vis-a-vis language, and people are willing to embody the principles and the concepts from their own traditions, okay? Are there possibilities in which authoritarianism can exist? Of course. But that's different than when I organize it in the context of the nation state. So let me give a very specific example. When Islam was introduced to Muslims in the Arabian Peninsula, the tendency of Arabs is that if you insulted me, I would insult you back. If you pulled a sword, then I would fight back. And when Islam was revealed, for those that do not know, Muslims who embraced Islam were being tortured by their family in the desert. They were boycotted. They had hot coal being placed on their body. Just recant Islam. My son, my daughter, my aunt, my whatever, and we'll let you go. Muhammad even was offered, we will make you a king amongst us. A king. But just leave this thing called Islam. What did Muslims do? Muslims went to first to Abyssinia, Ethiopia, modern day Ethiopia, under the protection of the King Najus, again, who was a Christian and became a Muslim on his deathbed. What was the wisdom in that? Changing your environment, building alternatives with people that are like you, community with people that are like you and not like you. Learning. The Quran says, وَخَلَقْنَاكُم مِّن شُعُوبٍ وَقَبَائِلِ تَعَارَفُوا. We've created you from tribes and nations so that you may get to know one another. And the best amongst you are those that exercise taqwa, piety. What is piety in Islam? Anchored within social justice. And again, the original polity was not, there is no such thing as an Islamic state. This is bullshit. The word, Muslims and Arabs don't even have a word for state. And when you hear Daesh or ISIS say, Al-Dawla al-Islamiyya, Duwayla does not even mean state. We took a word from the Quran. Duwayla is a term that appears in the Quran, and it actually falls between two verbs, zal and dar, to go away and to rotate. But we didn't have a word for state. So we started to use a word from the Quran that means the opposite of state. But to show you the fiasco of, again, language, we don't know even our own language, let alone what we're fighting against or what we're fighting for. But the point being, what is the concept of sovereignty besides in Allah in Islam? It's in the concept of the Ummah. Traditionally, the Ummah, including Muslims and non-Muslims, Sabians, Zoroastrians, Christians, Jews, all bound together by spiritual, ethical, political, so to answer the question of values, spiritual, ethical, political commitments. And what is ethics? Thou shalt not kill is a moral statement. That's a wonderful, aspirational, utopian, absolutely. Who cannot agree to that? But ethics is something else. It's contingent about space, time, concept. God forbid, if somebody walks through those doors and threatens us, do we not have a right to self-defense? No, I'm not talking the means of self-defense. It could be restraining them. It could be whatever. That's not the point. But it becomes an ethical moment. So that's what ethics is. Politics, that's what we're talking about in terms of commitment. But that's how you prevent, again, the possibility of a hegemonic moment. But people have to be willing to change themselves. Again, the Quran says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. God does not change a people until they change themselves. Tahrir. Down with Mubarak the Pharaoh. Okay, is there not a mini Obama, a mini Trump, a Pharaoh that exists inside each and every single one of us? This is what I'm saying insofar as confronting the micro-fascist, the monster inside ourselves. So that's how you do it. And the greater jihad is not only individual, it's also communal. So this is what becomes really fundamental. And again, okay, say we build this community right now. Say I become arrogant. Of course, because there are different levels of charisma, whatever. And I become authoritarian. But I'm not sitting on a high horse surrounded by a palace with bodyguards. You could kill me. And that is within your scope. And I hope that you would go about, and if I'm not, again, You could call me in, and if I'm not listening, I'm not listening, I'm not listening, and I'm acting in authoritarian ways, then at a certain point, either I'm outside the community or it's over for me. And that happened, we know, during the early period of Islam. 4 of the rightly guided caliphs, and khulafa, by the way, this caliphate, it's a European concept. It's not inherent to Islam, because we're all caretakers of the land. But anyways, 4 of the rightly guided Khalid, 3 of them were murdered. They were companions of the Prophet. If that's your fate, then that's your fate. But that's different than me saying, I am President Trump, I am President Putin, I'm Kim Jong-un, I'm Xi, I'm Maduro, you disobey me, I will murder you. That's because it's a state. And power is crystallized. But when it's fluid, I can be challenged. You can be pushed back. And we have many examples within many traditions of prophets, of messengers, of people with charisma being challenged that way, insofar as they're anti-authoritarian. And if they're not, then that's it. So I think that is how I think I covered most of the questions, but that is how you prevent that moment from constantly re-emerging. Because you actually construct a counter-discourse that is anti-authoritarian and is anchored in non-authoritarian concepts and practices beyond the rhetoric of anti-authoritarianism.
I think we have to hand over.
Of course.
Thank you. Thank you so much for such a spirited and compelling and passionate talk and the answers. And thank you all for attending. Thank you for the questions, for the engagement. This was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you all of you, tech people, lawyers, bodyguards. Thank you.
And remember to donate, please. And let's gather as many funds as possible. Thank you.